Yeah, but you don't have to write down every little detail. Like, don't pay attention to like dates and only pay attention to names. Or like you can pay attention to dates if you're like, whoa, that happened when like right after I was born or right before I was born, and it's crazy that that concept was still a new concept and I was born. Like, really, that's it. And then there's a lot of different deaf actors and deaf poets within here. So if there's one that you think is really cool and that you're gonna want to do their poem for your semester project, if you choose to do a poem, then jot their name down so that you can look them up later. Okay, so anything that strikes you as important to you, something that hits home, heart hits home, something that makes you mad, something that makes you happy, whatever. Just jot little things down.
Poetry. We dive deep into our hearts to find a kernel of emotion, and then through our creative use of language, we attempt to evoke that feeling in others. With poetry, we hope to forge a connection, to elicit a nod of understanding, the reassuring flash of recognition that tells us we are not alone. What happens if people do not believe their language is a true language, and poetry is an art form that will never be theirs? What if they finally find their language, their voice, and thus discover their poetry? What if at one special time, in one special place, a perfect storm of creativity is unleashed? Their eloquent hearts can now be shared, and perhaps awaken us all.
I think it was T.S. Eliot who said, poetry can express itself without truly understanding.
I remember reading a quote somewhere, and it said, poetry is like trying to capture the wind. But once it's caught, it's no longer the wind.
Emily Dickinson says, how do I know it's poetry? If the top of my head comes off, it's poetry.
It's a dance. It's another language. It truly is another language.
I can play with language. I can be creative with it. I don't have to just communicate, just get by with basic communication. I can express myself and I can take in what others express.
Every poet offers a vision of what will come.
Someone once told me that poetry is like taking a lot of different roses and squeezing them together until what you get out of them is one distilled drop of the attar of the rose.
It will just grow and change, getting better and better, in the same way that fine wine ages.
I think that long ago, primitive people told their stories to others by drawing on cave walls, through art, and by acting things out for each other. I believe man's first language was like watching a movie. For instance, The Tale of the Hunt.
I think also going back to Greek times. Let's, for example, take Sappho, great poet. She often had someone use a harp. No, poetry became rhythmic. And they have traveling singers called rap swords. In the Greek, it means a singer. They kept alive spirit of poetry, appreciation of poetry was a wonderful thing.
In the old days, in England, Anglo-Saxon language, there was no way to write it down. And there were these traveling troubadours who would gather a circle of people around, and then things that people asked for and things that people said influenced the performance. And then there was the Latin literature that was high culture and was written down on paper, and it was in a book, and therefore it was valorized as better.
You know, a long time ago, poetry wasn't written. It was a spoken art form, and the poet had an audience. You have to look at the history of poetry and how it changed over time. It had a completely different style before it was codified to the written page. Its entire nature at that point changed. And just as in olden times, sign language requires an audience as well.
And so when we start talking about performance poetry, we're talking about what originally was poetry, filtered through the lens of hundreds of years, and only hundreds of years, of text, till the point where a spoken word is something extraordinary, and a text is considered the poem. And those who don't, and for poems not in these books, we then rename the original orature as oral literature.
Lingua means tongue, the root of language, lingua. Literature, litera, means written. Tongue, write. That doesn't really fit with sign. So the problem historically has always been that we look at the ear, and that relates with sounds and words. That's why modern poets are amazed when they see ASL poetry, because they strive to take images and put them into language. Let the words become pictures. That's what we do in ASL poetry.
Poetry does not need to be defined as depending merely on sound. Not at all. Rather, it's much broader than that. Sound, sight, taste, all the senses are included. So the long-standing definition that we've had has been much too limiting. Poetry is much more expansive than that.
And Canada, their monthly literary meetings. They were not meetings, they were shows, 2 hours, mostly storytelling. Everybody liked that. Another person, very important person, my old friend who was with me at Canada, Miles Coon.
It had been very staid, formal-like. The signing was like extremely controlled. Then when I came on the scene with Jabberwocky, I started running all over the stage. I broke that mold. It really shook up the signing world. Everything was quite standard until I came along.
One night, he popped up in my dorm room. Said, "Bob, sit down. I want to show you something. You know, next Friday night we have a lit society meeting. In the poetry signing, I'm going to sign the poem, The Jabberwocky." I said, you think they will understand you? Sit down and watch. Watch when my mouth begins. I was mesmerized. Finished. I stood up. I said, "My God, it's marvelous. Something out of this world."
Was brillig, and the slithy toes, the gyre and gimble in the way. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mumarath out grave. Beware the jabberwock. My son, his jaws that bite, his claws that scratch. Beware the jub-jub bird. And shun the frumious Bandersnatch.
Wow. Before Malls, the signing was so formal and controlled. He was completely different. He took a different path.
I created that when I was 17. It was back in 1939. People weren't ready for that yet. 1/3 of the audience, they thought I was crazy. Another third thought I was a genius. The last third couldn't figure out which.
I became deaf at 10. So I was a good reader before that. I loved books. So my command of English was well established. Coming from an Italian family, and my father loved opera. He played the guitar and the flute, and he had gotten me singing Italian songs when I was 3-4 years old. Everybody said I had a wonderful voice. And deaf, father throws out guitar, start playing the flute at home. And I mean, no music left. My ears are deaf, but still I seem to hear sweet nature's music and the songs of men. For I have learned from fancy's artisan how written words can thrill the inner ear, just as they move the heart. And so for me, words also seem to ring out loud and free. In silent study, I have learned to tell each sacred shade of meaning and to hear a magic harmony at once sincere that somehow notes the tinkle of a bell, the cooing of a dove, the swish of leaves, the raindrops pitter-patter on the eaves, the lover's sigh and drumming of guitar. And if I choose the rustle of a star, graduated, got a job teaching English in school for the deaf of Fanwood. Bernard Bragg was one of my students. Oh, he fell in love with my way of signing. We set up the drama club. Very successful. I never told him anything about acting. It was natural. I got my MA from NYU. Gallaudet asked me to come and teach. Again, I taught Bragg at Gallaudet College.
Well, my father was an actor, and he was actually a poet. The way he described things, it would show up in his sign language as well. He was such a beautiful, sensual signer. If he was talking about how the water would tumble down a creek, when he spoke about the way the water would go over the rocks, he would describe the rock as being like a strong man letting the water pound his hunched shoulder, or if the stream was more gentle, like a woman washing her hands. I think it was my father who had the largest influence on me, but I have to say that Bob Panera ingrained the importance of English. I had the sign input from my dad and the English from Bob Panera, and I feel that it's both their contributions who made me who I am.
You guys alive over there? So maybe Kayla would sign, like, during one scene, Kayla would sign all the main words, and Siri would be like,
That's a High School Musical song.
or, you know, whatever you guys decide. And yeah, so just make sure that that all the music is divided up evenly. I don't want Siri doing all the verses and Kayla doing all the choruses, because Kayla then is just signing the same thing over and over again. So yeah. If you do a poem, I will give you a poem done by a deaf person. And if you decide to do this poem, I'll give you a selection. You'll pick one, and that's what you'll work on over the next semester. You'll work on memorizing the poem from that deaf person. Yeah, and you'll just sign. You'll literally sign verbatim what they signed.
Is it like a long poem? Or just a regular?
Some of them are long. I was trying to find this one poem.
You can memorize, like, sign it, like, do it like how they were signing it, like the picture scene. Like, I'm confused what kind of poem. You're not signing words. You're describing it like using like.
Here you go. Here is one of the poems that you might do. This is not a deaf person. This is a student.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Something. Okay.
But it's by LMA Lintz, who is a deaf poet. You guys, this is an example of something that you might have to do if you decide to do a poem. This is not a deaf person. This is a student, but she's redoing the poem. She's not in black and white.
She's in black and white.
No, she's just very pale and she's wearing black. I promise you. I'm dead serious. No.
Wait, are her pants blue? Can you see the blue in her pants?
Yeah. She's pretty pale on my computer too, and so then when it shows up for you guys. This poem has a lot of really deep meaning, which we won't get into today, but.
She's not in black and white. She's just really pale.
Alright, so there's one that you might get to do. Let me find a more modern one. Maybe one by... Okay, this is another one. So Daniel Durant he is in black and white. Yes, I'm sure. He is in black and white. Daniel Durant is deaf, and he's a little bit more modern. So I might give you one of his poems, and you would literally just take it and sign it, sign for sign. Facial expression for facial expression, movement for movement.
Was this like a caterpillar one?
Shush.
I just had a memory from yesterday. I'll have to tell you about it. It's really funny.
I forgot how to rhyme. He's doing the same handshake. But I don't know any other ones.
The grocery store is the inspection. That's like no frills. The other thing is no frills.
Oh my god, it's broken.
The grocery store. In the grocery store, like big sign.
I went to a What are the requirements? Are there requirements for the song? You have to pick a song.